Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this comprehensive masterclass on exactly why traditional software processes completely break down for AI teams and, more importantly, how we can actually fix them. Look, if you've ever felt like your machine learning team is speaking a totally different language than your engineering team, you are definitely in the right place. We all know that feeling, right? That completely opaque wall of model training where your data scientists are tweaking hyperparameters for weeks, the engineers are just sitting around waiting for an API, and the product manager is sitting there with absolutely no idea what's actually getting built. Well, today we're going to unpack how a team's communication cadence is effectively its operating system, and we're going to look at exactly how to redesign it from the ground up. The difference between a functioning AI team and a dysfunctional one isn't talent, it's how well the ceremonies are designed. I love this quote because it brilliantly illustrates the massive stakes of our explainer today. Broken ceremonies cause teams to quietly dysfunction. And when I say quietly dysfunction, I mean a scenario where, your team spends $10,000 on cloud compute training a model for a whole month, only to finally integrate it and discover its latency makes it completely unusable for your mobile app. That's a disaster. Problems just hide in the shadows until they become absolute catastrophes. Good ceremonies, on the other hand, well, they create this crucial early visibility into the tricky, highly complex blockers that are just so incredibly common in machine learning. So here is the roadmap for how we're going to meticulously dissect all of this today. First up, why Agile breaks. Then, fixing the daily stand-up, followed by rethinking the sprint review, the two-track retrospective, the cross-functional sync, and we'll wrap it up with case studies and mistakes. All right, Section 1, Why Agile Breaks. The battle between determinism versus AI reality. So the foundational issue we have to understand here is that traditional Scrum ceremonies assume work is deterministic. In traditional software, progress is test-driven and linear. You write a function for a button, you run a test, the button works, and you move on. Simple, right? But the AI reality is built entirely on empirical uncertainty. Model progress is incredibly nonlinear. I mean, you might spend a whole week tweaking a learning rate only to watch your accuracy drop by 10%. Or you might add thousands of rows of new data, and the model actually gets worse because of data drift. Plus, AI work is plagued by what we call silent blockers. Imagine your code compiles perfectly. The training loop runs for 48 hours without a single warning, but the loss function is secretly diverging because of a bad labeling batch. Your Agile board says the ticket is in progress, it looks perfectly healthy, but under the hood, you are fundamentally broken. If your ceremonies aren't specifically designed to catch these nonlinear, silent blockers, your entire process is just flying blind. Let's move right along to Section 2, Fixing the Daily Stand-Up. We need to move to 3 highly specific status buckets. The standard stand-up questions, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? Those completely fail machine learning teams. Hitting blockers isn't some rare anomaly in AI. It's practically the job description. Instead, your team needs to use 3 highly specific status buckets. When someone is on track, they literally cannot just say, I worked on the model. That is terrible communication. They must provide specific outputs. They need to say something like, trained model on expanded dataset, accuracy is at 79%, targeting 82% by Friday. Now, if they are at risk, they need to define the exact issue and the mitigation. Something like, found label inconsistency in 15% of examples, actively running a script to clean it. And if they are blocked, it has to be about external inputs. For example, I am blocked waiting on the data engineering team to unsilo the new customer tables. This exact granular verbiage is absolutely crucial because it forces accountability and it completely prevents individuals from hiding behind the complex math at their work. Which brings us to the ultimate anti-pattern. 2 words. Still training. We have all witnessed the status theater of a data scientist saying still training for 3 weeks straight. It teaches the team absolutely nothing, and it hides unbounded uncertainty. Now, look, sometimes a model genuinely does take a week to run, but what should the team actually be doing in the meantime? A model training in the background does not mean the data scientist gets to sit back and relax. They should be doing rigorous error analysis on the previous run. They should be actively building automated evaluation pipelines. They should be auditing the next batch of raw data. Banishing the phrase still training from your stand-ups is literally step 1 to gaining real, tangible visibility into what is actually happening on your team. Moving on to Section 3, Rethinking the Sprint Review. How to show real progress when you don't have a traditional user interface to demo. So traditional reviews often cause extreme awkwardness for AI teams because the whole meeting assumes you have a shiny, user-facing feature to demo. To fix this, you've got to meticulously show progress across three distinct dimensions. First, model quality. Show the metric trajectories over time versus your target baseline. Don't fall into the anti-pattern of throwing out contextless numbers. Just saying we had an F1 score of 0.8 means absolutely nothing if stakeholders don't know what the user actually requires. Second, feature readiness. You must show the infrastructure, the caching layers, the prompt wrappers, the UX integration work. If you only show the model itself, non-technical stakeholders are going to think a feature is completely ready to ship, when in reality it's only 30% done. And third, risk and learning. Openly discuss the data blockers you encountered and the architectural decisions you had to make. Product managers must learn to celebrate a 3% accuracy bump with the exact same energy and fanfare as shipping a brand new UI feature. Now, to properly cover all three of those dimensions without rushing, your sprint review needs a dedicated 45 minutes. That's a deep dive. You spend 15 minutes on model trajectory, 15 minutes on feature infrastructure, and 15 minutes on risk. Crucially, you use this time to set very clear, tangible expectations for the next sprint. A clear expectation sounds like this. We expect inference latency to be under 200 milliseconds next sprint, and if it's not, we are pivoting to a smaller model. Section 4 brings us to the two-track retrospective, balancing process flows and deep technical analysis. Traditional retrospectives always ask, how did we feel about the process? But for machine learning, that simply isn't enough. The most critical issues in AI are technical, model performance, data quality, embedding strategies, so the best AI teams run retrospectives on two strict parallel tracks. You start with track 1, your process retrospective. This is a hard-capped 30 minutes focused purely on your agile flow. Did our stand-ups give us visibility? Were dependencies unblocked on time? Once that timer ends, you immediately shift to track 2, the technical retrospective. This is 45 minutes dedicated entirely to the science. This is where you ask the deeply hard questions. Did our data augmentation strategy actually improve recall? Why did the model plateau at 78%? You absolutely must strictly separate these two tracks, because if you don't, your technical deep dive will constantly get derailed by people complaining about messy Jira tickets. But I have to warn you against a massive trap here. A technical retro must result in a technical decision. Let's look at a bad retro versus a good one. A bad retro sounds like this. Man, labeling is taking forever and the data is so noisy. Oh well, let's just keep going. Right? We've all been there. But a good retro sounds like, labeling is noisy, so we are making the decision to halt training, rewrite the labeling guidelines entirely, and reassess in 3 days. Everything in ML is hard, so the absolute goal here is to pivot or adapt. And to ensure that pivot actually happens, you must capture that technical decision in an architecture decision record or an explicit ticket. Do not let it just evaporate into thin air by Monday morning. Now, before we move on to the next part, I want you to pause and think about this for a second. What's the one crucial ceremony traditional Scrum completely forgot? Take a guess. If you look at standard Agile, there is a gaping hole when it comes to the highly unique integration needs of an AI product team. Section 5 has the answer: the cross-functional sync, preventing integration disasters before they ever happen. Look, in traditional software, roles are relatively independent, but in AI, you need regular, explicit synchronization to catch misalignment, which is exactly why this 30-minute sync is an absolute necessity. It happens twice a week during active feature work, and it specifically requires 3 key roles: the product manager representing user needs, the lead engineer representing system constraints, and the lead data scientist representing model reality. If even one of those people is missing, you have a massive blind spot. In this meeting, you walk through model status versus quality gates, asking things like, are we sacrificing too much speed just to get a tiny bump in accuracy? Then you walk through feature status. What exactly is the engineering team building while the model's off training? This is the exact place where you meticulously align all your risk points early on. And the most vital output of this entire sync is forging an explicit API contract. And we're not just talking about JSON formatting here. An AI API contract means explicitly agreeing on confidence score thresholds, fallback responses for when the model inevitably hallucinates, and the maximum acceptable latency. You absolutely must agree on all of this in week 2. Let me paint a picture for you of what happens if you don't. The data scientist works in total isolation and builds an incredibly accurate but massive 40-gigabyte model. Week 6 arrives, they hand it over with a smile, and the mobile engineer literally cannot deploy it to the edge device. You end up in a catastrophic, panic-driven rework cycle, all because you didn't sync up early. Let's transition to our final section, Section 6, to see how elite AI teams actually run these cadences in the real world, and summarize the biggest mistakes you need to avoid. First, let's look at Anthropic. Their teams are distributed globally, so they default to an async-first approach. Every researcher posts their status in Slack using our 3 highly specific buckets. But here is the secret to how they manage blockers. They use synchronous gates. If a researcher hits a complex decision point, they tag the PM in Slack and trigger a highly focused 15-minute synchronous sync right then and there. The big lesson here is that async scales beautifully across time zones, but it demands rigorous written clarity. A flawless written update for an AI team includes links to model dashboards, extremely clear hypotheses, and explicit requests for help. Next is Google Brain, which really showcases the power of the technical retro. Their retrospectives are run by the technical lead, not a Scrum Master. They ask, what was our hypothesis? What did we learn? Should we pivot? And here is the profound consequence of this meeting. Decisions made in this retro have the authority to instantly override sprint plans. If the technical lead realizes an architecture is a total dead end, they stop the sprint. Period. The agile system must adapt instantly. Why? Because training a massive model costs an exorbitant amount of compute and time. You absolutely cannot afford to wait 2 weeks for the sprint to end just to pivot away from a completely failed approach. To wrap up the pitfalls, let's take our time going through these critical anti-patterns so you can avoid them. Number 1, status theater disconnected from goals. That's people just talking about working on the model without tracking pace against actual milestones. Number 2, celebrating shipping a feature even if the model is below your quality gates. Listen, if you rush an LLM feature out the door and it hallucinates bad pricing data to a customer, you have destroyed user trust permanently. Number 3, retros that act as mere complaint sessions. Number 4, missing those vital cross-functional syncs, which leads straight to the integration nightmares we discussed earlier. And lastly, and maybe most importantly, treating data scientists exactly like engineers. Data scientists are doing research and empirical discovery, engineers are executing deterministic logic. Holding a data scientist to a set number of story points when they don't even know if their raw dataset contains the mathematical signal they need, it is a complete and utter disaster. All right, now it's time for direct application. I am challenging you to budget just 90 minutes before your next sprint to completely rebuild your team's playbook. First, redesign your stand-up formats. Literally, send a message to your team tomorrow morning with the new 3-bucket template. Just do it. Second, plan your sprint review. Book the full 45 minutes and explicitly assign presenters for model quality, infrastructure, and risk. Third, split your retrospective tracks. Send out a revised agenda that forcefully separates process discussions from technical discussions. And fourth, send the calendar invite today for a bi-weekly cross-functional sync to your lead engineer and your lead data scientist. I'll leave you with this one thought. Will you let your AI team dysfunction quietly, constantly hitting silent blockers and late-stage integration surprises? Or will you design an operating system that masters empirical uncertainty? The entire playbook is right here. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely cannot wait to see how you deeply transform your team's communication cadence.